Hey everybody, Dave here. Today I'm going to take you through an introduction of Blue Prism code stages. I'm going to try to keep it simple. There are going to be a number of things that I'll leave out of the video, and maybe I'll make a future one to go over those in more detail. But my goal here is, if you haven't used code stages yet, you're still confused by them, that hopefully this video will get you over any hurdles that are keeping you from knowing what to do with them. And so I'm going to assume basically some basic knowledge of Blue Prism, but not necessarily much more than just having practiced using processes and objects. So we'll start by making a process, and we'll make a placeholder for where we want to use our code. We'll then make an object where we would make our code stage in, and then we'll write a tiny little bit of code, and then we'll connect them all together. And that way, hopefully you can see that connection from process to object to code stage, whatever else, right? Let's start by creating a process. So I'm just going to pick a folder, click create process, and then I'm going to call this process code stages BP dev tip. And then quick example of using code stages in Blue Prism. Now in the process, what I'm going to do is drop a note stage in as a placeholder. So this is our placeholder for using code to add two numbers. Okay, so this is where it's going to be called right here, but the object, the code stage and stuff, none of that exists yet. And in Blue Prism, while you may not be used to this if you've used other tools, you create processes, which are like the business logic, separate from the objects, which are the reusable components. And while it might be nice to be able to create an object, or generate one from inside of a process, that's just not how it works right now. So we'll save this process as created and added placeholder. All right, so we save the process, and I'm just going to put this process over to the side for a second. So we'll go back over to the main window of Blue Prism, go to our objects section, and I'm going to create an object. I'll call it code stages object BP dev tip, where the code stage will reside. And then I'll open the object. So we're going to ignore the initialize and the cleanup pages. We'll go to action 1 and we'll rename this. We'll rename this add two numbers. Okay. We know that we're going to add two numbers, so I'm going to go ahead and right off the bat create two inputs that I'm going to use in the process. So I opened the start stage, which is where we'll put our start parameters. I'm going to add two, say first number, second number. I'll make these both a data type of number. I'm going to click these buttons to auto create the data items on this page. You'll see they got created as a number. Then I'll move them. All right, so we have our startup parameters, and we will need some output parameters as well. So I'm going to go into the end stage, and we just have one output because we're going to add the numbers together. So we'll call this total, and we'll want this to be a number as well. I'm going to go ahead and click this to auto create that. This will be our output parameter. And now we want to make our code. So let's drag a code stage on the left side. You'll notice that code stages are only in Object Studio. If I go back over and show you Process Studio, so you can see the list of stages that are available in Process Studio. There's fewer of them than in Object Studio, but when Blue Prism made Blue Prism, they decided to keep the business logic in processes and then the reusable components and stuff in the objects. And one way that they restrict that and kind of push toward that design is to have code stages and wait stages and write stages and stuff like that, navigate stages, all in Object Studio only. So we have our object, we have our input parameters, our output parameter, and data items. Let's drag a code stage from the left side onto the page. Don't be confused with process. They look kind of similar. The code stage has these dotted lines down the side, and processes have this solid line. A process would actually be, this would be a sub-process call, which you'd use to call something like this, right? What we were making in Process Studio. But that's not what we want. So code stage, I'm going to go ahead and link this in. And then I'm going to rename the code stage, add. Okay, now this is what we have. I'm going to hit the error checker. You see we have no errors right now. There's one thing we need to do before we start adding any code into this stage. And that is that we need to choose a language that we're going to write our code in. So if you go to the initialize page, into this properties stage or this info stage or whatever, you can ignore conditions. That's something that's good to fill out, but we don't necessarily need it here when we're practicing. And then not in the information tab either. We'll come back to that, or maybe I'll bring that up in a future video. Global code is a place where you can type code, but I'm going to leave that out for now because we don't have to use that. That's more to make code more reusable across the object. So I'm going to go to the code options tab, which is something that you'll have to use. And right now what we're just doing is choosing a language. We're not dealing with the references or the namespace imports. So just the language. You can really just choose whatever you want, but I'm going to choose C# because that's what I'm more familiar with. I've worked with Visual Basic, VB.NET, and C#, but I just like C# a little bit more. And I tend to put a semicolon at the end of every line when I type code, no matter what language I'm doing, so I can't help that. We'll see how that goes, though. I'll probably forget which language I'm using, but whatever. So I'm an amateur, too, at writing code, so if you're like me and you're kind of, you're not super experienced with writing code, we're kind of in the same place, so hopefully I'll be able to describe this at the level that you need. So I'm going to choose C#, and this is important because when you go to type the code and you check for errors, it's going to throw a lot of errors if you chose the wrong language. So just remember, if you go onto the internet and you copy some code and you paste it into a code stage and it's giving you a whole lot of errors, it may be because you've chosen the wrong language. So you just need to determine which language the code is that you copied. And there's some kind of obvious things about the syntax of each language that makes it, it's kind of obvious which one it is. Semicolons at the end of a line is going to be C#, and no characters at the end of a line, it probably mean Visual Basic. Let's pretend like Visual J# is not here. Let's just pretend like that's not there. I'm choosing C#. Click OK. Check for errors again just to make sure we're still good to go. You know what? Before we go further, let's go ahead and add this to our process. So first thing I gotta do to make that a thing is to publish this action. So I can either right click on the name of it and hit publish here, or you can also open this properties stage and choose to check the box here. So what I'm doing is publishing so that it's exposed so that it can be called from the process. I've already added my input parameters and my output parameters, so I can go ahead and call it from the process now, but I've got to save it first. All right, so we're going to go ahead and save this. Added code stage with no code and chose C#. All right, so let's go back over and close our process and reopen it. Okay, drag an action stage on here, hit the drop down and scroll down to our object that we created. And now you can see it auto chooses the only action that's available, add two numbers. See that initialize and cleanup are not available. So let's put in a number. Let's create some data items. First number. And we'll put 5 for the first number. Copy and paste to create the second data item. Second number, we'll put 10. We'd expect to get 15 out of this. So we want our answer, we'll call it. So when we call this action, we will pass in first number second number. The output will be total, right? So just wanted to show you, you don't have to name these the same. It doesn't matter. You can take the answer, the number from total, put it into answer. That's fine. All right, let's delete our placeholder for this action. All right. So this won't work right now. If I were to run this, so I'll step over. You see, it didn't throw any errors, but that's because there's no errors in the object. It just doesn't do anything with the numbers. So what it gave us back, so it took these, right? I'll actually show you that. If I step in, it'll take those numbers, first number and second number. I just hit F11, by the way, to step into the code stages object. And you see it took 5 and 10, but then when it goes to the end stage, it takes from total, which is nothing in it, because at no point do we transfer these numbers and add them together and put them into total. That's what we're going to do inside this code stage. Keep stepping. And so when it came out of that object and passed the number back, it was empty, right? So we don't have anything in answer. Let's save this. Added ref to action stage. Then we'll move back over to the object. Okay, so the only thing we need to do now is put a little bit of code in our code stage, and we'll need the inputs and outputs in the code stage to make sure that it's taking from these numbers, using those to add, and then outputting into total, so that then total can go out this end stage and go back to the process so that we can use it. So let's open the add code stage. All right, let's create a couple of inputs. First number, second number. I'm going to type first number here to show you what this will do. Second number. Then our output, will probably just call it the same thing, total. Store it in total. All right. So now we've gone one step further. Wait, what's our error? The output parameter total must be assigned. Right. Okay, let's ignore that. So right now everything's good except that we don't do anything with those numbers still. We are now just taking these numbers into the code stage and then not doing anything with them, passing out an empty value for total here, and then passing that empty value out the end stage, which then goes over to this answer when it comes out of this action stage. Let's go into the code stage again, and first thing you'll notice is a big blank space where we got to type code, and an error checker. So this checks for compile errors, and we've got one already. This is telling us that the output parameter we created, total, has to have a value assigned to it before this code stage will work properly. So it's just kind of warning you like, hey, you have an output parameter, but you're not doing anything with it. Now, the other thing you'll see is these parameters that get created. This is a little bit, this might be new to you if you haven't worked with programming at all before getting into this, is you told, for example, the first number to have a data type of number. But then when you look in the code stage, you created, I should mention, when you create parameters here, these are usable variables that you can use in the code inside this code stage. Same thing with the output parameters. You create something here, you give it a data type, that is something that's usable as a variable in the code. Let me show you. First number, two things happen to it. For it to be usable in the code, it got changed because its name can't have a space in it. So an underscore was placed between first and number. I could have just named it like this, so it doesn't have a space in it. Go over to the code, and you see now there's no underscore there. But, I mean, it's kind of up to you how you want the readability to be. You know, is it easier for you to read it with an underscore? Typically, coders, developers, whatever, they won't put a space inside of any variable names, and they'll use camel case to name things like this. That would be more commonly the naming convention for a data item. All right, anyway, or a variable. So we can use these. We can also create extra variables in here. And in C#, you'd do that by saying something like, if I wanted another variable, I can say double, which is a data type, a number data type, double third number, equals 5. Okay, so I just created another variable, and this effectively, maybe I should do it the same data type as the others, decimal. All right, so this does the same thing as these do. Right? These create variables, this creates a variable. The reason you use these over here is that this is how you get data into a code stage, like, take it from somewhere else, put it into a code stage, and then take that same, some number, some text or whatever, and pass it out of the code stage. These are the only ways to get the variables out. All right, I'm going to delete this. So let's take these and add them together and put the value into total. Oh, I forgot to mention one other thing, right? So if you noticed that the data type of these in here is decimal, that's because .NET doesn't have a data type called number. Blue Prism is going for a no code type of solution, right? Like make it easy for people to go from no coding experience to being able to do some of this complex process automation. And one of the ways they did that is they just came up with a data type called number. But in fact, in .NET, which is a framework, or name some word that works there, there's probably another word for that, that Blue Prism is based on, and all the code that you write is based on that. So C# and VB.NET, those are all part of the .NET framework. So the numbers that you work with actually underlying are called decimal. That's the data type in .NET. But there's also integer and double and a number of other data types that are all numbers, but it gives the developer the flexibility of determining how big can this number be, how small does it need to be. They can basically allot memory sizes to the different types of variables, and that's for numbers. I've probably just confused you. So just tie it back to saying in Blue Prism, number equals decimal. So I'm going to take this, this is actually going to be really simple. So total, which is a variable, Blue Prism will recognize this as a variable, which is this output parameter, equals first number plus second number. And by doing this, you don't ever have to use a calculation stage. I don't know why you'd ever do that, but you could effectively add, subtract, multiply, whatever, all of your numbers and stuff in code stages instead of at the process level or in the object level and calculation stages. But Blue Prism gives you a way to use expressions and stuff to do a lot of those easier things without using code. Oh, and then a semicolon at the end. So let's check the code. Now let me show you what happens when I go switch it to Visual Basic. Initialize, change this code options to Visual Basic. I don't think it'd actually be that different, but let's do the errors checker. It says, yeah, so compiler error at line 1, character is not valid. And it's saying, wait, does it tell me which character? Sick, it doesn't tell me what character. Great. But I know that it's this semicolon at the end. So let me just delete it and let's see if it's good now. Whoa, look at that. So in this case, this line of code, the only difference between Visual Basic and C# is that semicolon. And that's really the only way you can tell the difference between the two. Now, usually if you're declaring variables, for example, it's very different. So I just showed you the example of creating declaring a decimal third number. Let's see, third number equals 1.0 or something like that. So that's C#. Visual Basic, I think, would be like dim third number as decimal or something like that. Equals 1.0. Oh, no semicolon. Anyways, it'd be something like that, right? So sometimes it can look very different, but in other cases it's very similar. So I'm going to change this back to putting a semicolon, click OK, go back to initialize, code options, change it to C# because it makes me feel better. And then I'm going to reset. So now we have 0 errors. And let's save this. Finished, hopefully. And then go back to our process. I'm going to reset so that it gets the new object that I just saved. And let's Look at that. So we stepped over this and it added 5 plus 10. The answer is 15. Let's reset and let's do it a little bit slower. I'm going to hit F11 to step into this action. It's going to open up an ad hoc test version. You see up here on the left, ad hoc test version of this object. So that's kind of like it's exactly what it is. It's an ad hoc test version. Anyway, so I'm going to step in, and you'll see that the first number and second number will get populated with 5 and 10 from the startup parameter. All right. Now we're going to step over the code stage. We can't unfortunately see what it does here, except that it will give us the answer of 15 in total. Right. These numbers went in. The inputs right here got passed into the code. These are those input parameters. They got added together, put into total, and then total is passed out of the output of this code stage, which gets placed here. Then this end stage will take this total, and I'm going to step again. So it happened really quick, but the object, that ad hoc test, just went away. And now we're back in the original process, and the output went to answer. So that's how we got it. So that is a very simple and completely unnecessary way to use code stages. But I think that you see now how you can use it. Now there's a number of other things that you will need to know in working with code stages, and I intend to make another video to talk about that. Because at first I started to make a video, and after like 35 minutes of my recording this, I was like, this is way too much information right off the bat. So take this, and I wouldn't expect that if you were to go copy code from the internet, paste it into a code stage, I think it's very unlikely that the code is going to work for you. And the reason for that, I'll just give a little bit of I'll just mention this ahead of time, is you've got to deal with a couple more things, and that is the namespace imports, the references to like DLL files, and then dealing with errors and like how you fix those things. So we'll talk about that more in another video if I ever get around to it. All right, so thanks for watching, and have a great week of coding.